The reason Steve Jobs stuff worked for him was because he had a personal affinity and affection for modern art, calligraphy, design, music.
All right. Hello, everyone. Kevin Schragi here with Zach Stevens with Zach Stevens Designs. Today, we're going to talk about why marketing without a strong brand can cost you. And I brought Zach Stevens on because he is a branding expert. So I've been, doing marketing for about 15 years and not a brand expert, but we've always, working on companies, and we always made sure that the brand was strong before we went into doing all of our marketing activities. So I want Zach to kind of introduce himself, and then we'll talk about brand and then talk about marketing.
Perfect. Thanks for having me on, Kevin. So as Kevin said, I'm a brand expert. I primarily focus on software companies and building out the design assets and laying the foundational pieces so that someone like Kevin, who is in the marketing space, can take this visual language that I've created with a company and then carry it on into their advertising. And as Kevin would do within the marketing space, same would a product designer or someone who is actually going to be building out visual assets for this company.
Right on. Thanks, Zach. So I want to start out by, let's talk about what marketing is and what branding is, because I think the two always get kind of overlapped and they think that they're one and the same. So I want to start out by you kind of explaining the branding piece, and then maybe I can go in and talk a little about the marketing piece and why we think they're different.
Yeah, well, it's the weirdest thing, because I think that some people get really heated over this topic. Like I remember a couple of years ago, Donald Miller, who wrote Building a Story Brand, had this whole video that was like, you don't even need to brand until you hit like, $100 million in sales or some ridiculously high number like that. Which is funny coming from the guy who wrote Building a Story Brand, that he would knock branding that hard. What I like to do is I like to pull from people that have more experience in this place than I do. And I always cite Marty Neumeier, who wrote the book, The Brand Gap, where he defines brand as the gut feeling that somebody has towards an entity. So the truth of the matter is that whether you are intending to build a brand or not, you are going to have one regardless, because everyone is going to have this perception of you. And your job as the CEO or the CMO or any person who is a part of a company is to make sure that that feeling is at least pointing in the direction that is desired by the business. For example, if you are trying to be seen as this high-end, luxury, expensive, refined brand, and your business cards look like they were designed by a 4-year-old, then you are totally clashing with that intended message and the perception that you are working toward. So the brand is the gut feeling. Everything else that you do is influencing it.
No, that's a great way to put it. So I know you're talking about Donald Miller. I think he's got an excellent book on story brand. But no matter where you're at in your company, you have a brand, right?
Exactly. And that's the point.
There's no reason to not start building that from the very beginning. But yeah, so on the marketing side of things is I always say like branding is your story, and then marketing is telling that story. So the marketing side of things, it's really taking that brand and getting it out to the masses, so through all the different channels. And if you don't do that with a good, strong brand, you're going to find it very difficult to tell the story in a good and emotional way, like you're talking about.
Exactly. They're highly interlinked. Like it strikes me, it's somewhat appalling that people would get into fights over these two things, because they're two sides of the same coin. It's getting people to enjoy the things that you do and offer things that they actually want to use, and having fun in the process. So it's a really stupid argument.
This kind of goes into our next question for you. Like, what makes up a strong brand? Because the one thing I don't like when people think about brand is they always think the brand is the logo, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a huge piece of the brand. That's where it always starts, or at least it kind of starts there. But what makes up a strong brand, and what does it consist of?
But I was thinking about this because, full disclosure, Kevin and I, we thought about some talking points before this. Shocker, came into this with a plan. Um, and I think that the logo is often characterized as the face of the brand. And it's like, if you think of your brand as a person, the logo is this. Like, it's the face that you recognize the company. It's the flag on the ground that allows you to spot and identify who this thing is from, be it a piece of collateral, a package, a advertisement. If it's at the top of the left-hand corner or the middle of a website, the logo is just there to let you know that it's a visual identifier of this is who this is from. And a strong brand, like, the logo should be appropriate for it, but the brand is really the emotion. So you know that you've done your job when the emotions you want people to feel are felt. Or, pushing it a little bit further, and I'm gonna mess up the verbiage here because I don't know it off the top of my head. There's a value ladder within another one of Marty Neumeier's books called The Brand Flip, where one of the questions that I think is the most important is, if this brand were no longer here, how would your life be impacted? And you rate that on like a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being heavily impacted, 1 being not so much. And if that score is a 10, then you know that you've established a really unique bond with that ideal customer or user for this product. It's kind of like, I'm a huge fan of Converse Chuck Taylor's sneakers. It's the only shoe that I wear, pretty much. So if Chuck Taylors were no longer around tomorrow, I'd be kind of sad. And it's not just because I like the shoe and it fits well, but it's because it has a long history of, like, starting, it was like one of the first basketball shoes, which is really unique, and athletics. And then it got adopted by, the punk crowd in the 1970s. And it's got this rich heritage of rebellion and being a badass. Like, there's a personal connection that I have with that brand.
I'm a big fan of Chuck Taylor's too. And I would feel the same way if they discontinued them tomorrow, and there would be a lot of knockoffs, but I would not purchase them.
Right. And that's the thing, right? Is that there are knockoff versions of Chuck Taylors. You can find them at any, like, Walmart or, lower tier affordable store, but it's not the same as a Chuck Taylor. Like, you want the Chuck Taylor logo on your sneaker.
So part of the brand is, telling your story. And, one person that did this very, very well was Steve Jobs, who's a great storyteller. People always talk about him being very innovative and all that good stuff. But what Steve Jobs, what I personally think is, I think he did a really, really good job of not only like sharing his vision, but having a story behind every product that he would get behind and tell that story. In your opinion, what's important? Like, how important is your story to attach that to your brand?
I think it's of the utmost importance. Right now, there's a lack of personal affection and personal stake from a founder's perspective that's put into their brand. And they're really just going off design based on things that have worked in the past, which is why you hear Apple as a really good example. But everyone just looks at that at surface level, right? It's really good design principles, like good hierarchy and balance and contrast and legibility. And those are all things that can be accomplished without having to stick to a gray and white color palette. The reason Steve Jobs stuff worked for him was because he had a personal affinity and an affection for modern art, calligraphy, design, music. And he brought that to the table because at the time, you have to think that it was Hewlett Packard, it was IBM, and maybe a couple of other smaller computer companies, but none of them brought this aesthetic element to it. And I think this also goes into his time that he spent at Atari, or was one early video game company that was really focused on graphic interfaces. And he saw this opportunity to merge these two worlds. And that's where I think a lot of founders get lost today, is that they don't take enough stock of the things that have inspired them and got them to the place where they are now, the things that make them feel the way that they want other people to feel, and just go for the Apple like aesthetic that is really popular. Like, lots of color gradients and a sans serif typeface and call it a day. But you can do so much more than that. And you can actually infuse and see these corollary patterns and parallels between your own personal journey and the things that influence you and the same journey that your users are going on. And if you can do that, like if you can bring in some outside unique theme or motif and pair it with whatever you are working on, like how Steve Jobs took modern art design and mashed it with computers, you get something really special.
Yeah, I mean, Apple's probably one of the strongest brands in the world, and it's way beyond, the Apple logo, which is really cool. We're seeing, people's laptop opened up with the Apple logo on it. Like they did the campaign back in the day with the iPods where all you had to do is see the white, the white headphones, and that everybody just recognized as the Apple headphones. But there's so many small cues like that they just did a really, really good job of looking beyond just, the Apple logo and doing these little things from a design perspective to make it what Apple is today. And I always use Apple as a comparison to, like, if you want to like teach brand, it's like, would you rather have a tablet or an iPad? They both do the same thing, but everybody wants the iPad, right? And that's the power of brand. Like,
exactly. So brand has been equated to, like, it hedges against quite a few things. One, it makes it so that you are hopefully irreplaceable, right? Like the power of a strong brand is that you are the one and only for this particular product category. Number two, it means that people are going to have a more emotional investment towards you. And when their emotions are involved, they tend to spend a higher price premium, especially if you have delighted them in any way. And lastly, if and when your company does something that you regret or feel is stupid, they're much more likely to forgive you because you have such a long track record and history of showing up, and not only showing up, but showing up in a way that actually leaves a lasting impact.
Yeah. So, I hate using Apple as an example because they're a beast and, you can't replicate Apple. I've actually, I don't know how many times in my career somebody's like, oh, check out this Apple landing page. Can you create that? It's like, dude, that's Apple. Like, you got a bigger budget. And first of all, you can't replicate that. But from my experience in marketing, we always find it much easier to go to market with any kind of campaign that we're going to run or creating any kind of marketing collateral when there's a strong brand guideline created for our company. Can you talk a little bit about that and what the importance it is to not only maybe talk about what a brand guideline usually consists of and then why that's important to have one for your company?
Totally. So I think one of the biggest things that comes up and the hurdles that most startups have when they're scaling is that so many different people, especially if they're hiring freelance designers, touch their marketing assets. And what that means is that you have not just one, not just two, but like upwards of 10 cooks trying to make the same thing. And they don't have a recipe book for it. They're just flying by night and by the seat of their pants if they don't have brand guidelines. It's brand guidelines. I've seen it done a couple ways. It can be as simple as having like a Notion doc or a wiki that details core things and unifying elements that tie all your marketing collateral and your product together. And to rattle off a few, it'd be like your typefaces. So typically you have between one, maybe two, and maybe like special use case typefaces that you bring in. It has your colors, which are, I would not recommend having like a rainbow color palette because it's quite difficult to manage, but you typically get between 3 and 5, and then you're able to roll with those. And that constraint gives your designer a lot of creativity to work within. It'll have some guidelines on your logo and how to use it, especially if there's different lockups. Like you could have your primary lockup, which is maybe more horizontal oriented. You have a secondary one that is more vertical space for when the space permits, and a symbolic one if it is useful for things like your favicon or an Instagram profile picture, Facebook, things of the like. You can even go even further and do things like your photo styling. Like we use these kind of temperatures and color treatments for our brand photography, or illustration packs and icons. Like the whole point of these brand guidelines is to make everything consistent, and that consistency breeds legitimacy.
Yeah, and I would highly recommend going as detailed as possible on those brand guidelines, like you're mentioning, talking about different aesthetics you have in your photos. We even go into like brand voice and like what to say, what not to say. But typically when you're creating these, it sets the framework for anybody that's going to work inside your brand. And you tell the story about having like 10 cooks in the kitchen. I've been at several companies where that it's very common, especially startups, because they're just trying to make stuff happen, which is awesome. But then when you start looking through all of their collateral and website and all this stuff, everything just doesn't, it all clashes. And you can open up one document and without the logo on there, you wouldn't even know it's from that company.
Exactly.
So with that being said, I want to kind of go into the importance of creating this strong brand, having these brand guidelines set up, and how it can help you when you do go to market and you're doing all of your different marketing campaigns. So if from your experience, when you are creating any type of materials that for the brand, can you kind of go into why it makes it so much easier for you to create those materials with a strong brand in those marketing guidelines, or the brand guidelines?
Well, I'd start with the creation of material, because in most cases, the designer is going to be brought in, like if it's an advertising campaign and you're a smaller, like small to medium sized business, particularly a startup, because the designer is going to have a more empathic understanding with the person that's going to be seeing this thing or reading this blog article. And what that strong brand helps you do is it helps you outline the story in totality. I think I've always equated it to a movie, and a movie usually will have one large plot line, right? Like in Star Wars, it was, hey, we gotta, like the big plot line is we gotta defeat the Empire. And there's subplots within that, like, well, in order to do that, we gotta go rescue Princess Leia. And after we do that, we gotta escape the Death Star. And then we gotta go blow up the Death Star. And if they had taken this weird journey to like, well, first we're gonna go grocery shop at Naboo. I'm diving real deep into the Star Wars universe here. And then we're going to go do all that stuff. You would have been like, well, what's the point of this Naboo like sidestep? It doesn't line up with the overall objective. And the same thing happens with your brand. Like if you do some offshoot that doesn't line up with your overall mission, or you can't find some way to tie it in a way that's really clear, then you run into a problem, and your marketing and your messaging gets disjointed from your overall mission, which is what you should be, like the core message that people should be getting across.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. From my experience, you can go into so many different offshoots with these ideas, because everybody has this great idea. They got this great marketing campaign they want to run. But if you start going all these different directions and these different offshoots, it can really complicate things for the customer. You talk about the customer journey, right? Whenever you're introducing the customer to the brand and there's like 20 different things going on, you lost them. Like so the stronger you have with that brand from the very beginning and sticking to those core things, the better you can getting the message across.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
I kind of want to go into the reason why we were talking about this is because I see this time and time again on why companies it can cost you a lot of money in the long run when you don't have a strong brand. And again, your brand starts the moment you start talking about your company. the moment that idea is in your head and you start telling people, your brand has already started. The next thing is to like polish it, come up with the name, the logo, and all that good stuff, right? Now, what I want to kind of talk about is like without all that stuff established from the very beginning of your company, it can end up costing you a lot of money in the long run. And I want to just talk about my experiences real quick, and then I'll let you kind of just to embellish on a little bit. But when we were doing marketing campaigns at companies without a strong brand, a couple of things would happen. One, we'd get in these meetings and people would be arguing over the silliest things, like the font or a color of a button, things that probably aren't going to make a big impact, but it would be something that people want to have an opinion on. But when you go in with some really strong brand, and good brand guidelines, and that's once already established, those things don't matter because they're already figured out. And we can talk about bigger things that are going to have bigger impact on the campaign, like the actual campaign itself, like the people that we're going to target, the message, the copy that goes into it. But people, it's weird. Like people love to like get involved in the design process. I'm sure you've seen this in your career. People that know nothing about design, I hear this all the time. Like, no, I don't know how to make it look cool, but I know when it looks cool and I'll let you know. Like those are people are so annoying to me because like, yeah, of course you can see something, of course you can see beauty, but not being able to create that is like a whole nother thing.
Yeah, well, this is the whole point of why that story is so important, because as you said, that stuff should be figured out, like your colors, your typefaces. Those, I would say, are the two big things that most people want to argue about. They're like, I don't like that font. I don't like that color. It's like, well, it doesn't matter because we've already decided this long time ago and we're going to roll with it. This is assuming, of course, we did a good job. And unless you can come up with a defensible reason on why those base elements need to change and shift, then you're going to have a really hard time getting past that initial mission of like, well, this is why this all works together. And we have written evidence in our brand guide that we have all adhered to and that has gotten us this far. And this is why we're going to stick with it. We can argue about like, sizing and all that other stuff and the message and the voice and the goals that are trying to be established within whatever it is we're working on, because so much of this is offloaded. And I guess what that mainly saves, which is the most invaluable asset, is time. Because the clock is running. And if you have to waste time going back and forth on these iterations for design, your campaigns are going to slow up, your product development is going to slow up. The trickle down from not having these designs is almost endless, or not having these design guidelines is almost endless.
Yeah, I mean, there's the simple things of like things taking longer, but the bigger thing is like if it takes you 6 months to launch a campaign because you guys are arguing over typeface and button color and all that stuff, there's probably a lot of opportunities you're missing out on. I'm a guy that likes to move fast, especially when you're at startups. If you're not moving fast, like that's your competitive advantage usually. Like, these big corporations, they're steering a Titanic, so it's like takes them forever to make a pivot or change directions. But to startup, I always like say it's like a speedboat. Like we can shift pretty fast. So like if we see an opportunity, we can go after it. But yeah, when you're trying to like launch a marketing campaign, and you don't have those things established, and that just ends up like eating up all your time talking about those things, it ends up costing you more than just the time and the resource, but there's opportunity costs. But there's things too, like when you're talking about creating the brand, like there's making templates, making like the website templates, landing page templates, collateral, it can business cards. There's so many different things, but having those things created and having a good foundation will help you go really fast whenever you're trying to launch your campaigns and talk about higher level activities and bigger impact stuff and not worrying about those things.
Yeah, it sounds really, this is an off the cuff analogy. It's really similar to like you might have like a recipe book, right, to make a meal. And it's the difference between having to go to the store every time you need to get an ingredient or just pulling it from your cupboard, right? Like
Yep.
the amount of time and the sunk cost that goes into that is annoying.
Yep. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Then another thing, I just read an article about this. I'm not sure if you knew about this, but Ryan Reynolds has a marketing company. He
I did.
owns Aviation Gin brand and I think Mint Mobile, I believe.
Mhm.
He just did something really cool. We're talking about speed. He I forgot exactly what it was, but somebody famous said something about being in one of his commercials, and maybe somebody made a comment about it. And within, I think it was like 2 to 3 days, they shot a commercial and had him in it. They call it fast advertising. But that's again this, when you can move it, especially now, you know how like news feeds move so fast and like trends happen. Thing will become popular one day, and the next thing you completely forget about it. But again, whenever you can move fast like that with your marketing campaigns, you can take advantage of some of those opportunities that these giant companies can't take advantage.
Exactly. You're offloading your mental capacity as well. Like, this is my uniform every day. I only wear black t-shirts and blue jeans and white sneakers. So what's cool about that is that when I get up in the morning, I never worry about what I'm going to wear. Like the only thing I might worry about is if it's cold, I'll put on a jacket, which is also black. So
Yeah, you
there's no,
stole
what's
that from Steve Jobs, right?
yeah, but I'm not going to wear a turtleneck. It's just not my
Her
style. And
name,
I'm never tucking my t-shirt into my jeans just because that's weird.
Elizabeth Holmes, Theranos tried to do the whole Steve Jobs thing. She wore the turtleneck. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. Don't equate me with her, please.
No, I've had this conversation with other people about not having to decide what you have to wear in the morning, and was talking about the whole Steve Jobs thing. And they were like arguing, like, that's crazy. Like, why does it take you so long to decide what to wear? It's like those little things, like that extra mental capacity to like have to do that actually has effect on your day. And um, I don't wear brand arrow t-shirts every single day, but I do have a few of them. And it's easy just to throw one of those on. So maybe I have to step up my wardrobe and just wear a black t-shirt every day.
Or just wear the same t-shirt, get like 20 of those printed out and wear one every single day. Yeah. As long as it's modular and you can switch out the pieces, that's what's most important.
Right on.
Mhm.
So one thing, if you have, I think you have some examples of a strong brand versus not a strong brand. Do you have any like favorite ones that you can talk about? And then maybe if you have any, like, what are some that you've seen that are just like, you're just shaking your head, like, what are they trying to do here?
Oh man, I didn't know if we were supposed to look at the bad ones too. I think my favorite example, one of my favorite examples as of late is there's a software that I use for building out websites. It's called Webflow. They're quite a big company now, but many years ago when I started using them in 2016, they weren't. They hadn't gotten a massive $75 million round from investors. And prior to that, what really made them stick out was really good positioning. Because there's a lot of these website builders out there like Squarespace, WordPress, Wix, like the list is endless, right?
Yeah.
And none of them did as good a job as speaking to the designer side of building websites as Webflow did. Like if you look at the design, the language that Webflow uses and their colors, the messaging that they provide, and even their product, like their product looks like Adobe Photoshop or Illustrator mixed with like a visual HTML and CSS drag and drop tool. So compare that to something like WordPress, on top of the fact that Webflow puts out these really cool and funny videos and tutorials on how to use their product with this guy named McGuire. And WordPress can't hold a candle to it. It's like all they have is like the only thing they have is they're resting on their laurels, which is like the fact that I think 30% of the websites are built with WordPress, and the fact that it's open source. But try and pull a designer away from Webflow once they've used it, not a chance. Like,
Dude,
there is no way.
that is such a great comparison when you talk about that, talk about brand. First of all, WordPress just like, I just don't understand it. How did it become the #1 CMS tool? Like the whole, I use WordPress. My website's in WordPress right now, but the way WordPress works and that whole thing just really confuses me that that's like the #1 tool that everybody uses. It's very complicated. At least for me, like I don't understand it. I mean, but then I have used Webflow, very impressed with it. And yes, their brand is on point. And one of my favorite things about Webflow, and you brought this up, is this actually made me become to actually love Webflow, is whenever I had some issues with like trying to figure something out, and I start watching their videos to figure this out. And I think the guy is like an actual comedian because he's funny. His videos were like cracking me up. I'm like, this is a really good experience with working with Webflow. And I wish I could crack up jokes like that and be funny and entertain my crowd. But they did a really good job with that. And I don't know, it's going to take something like that to disrupt WordPress, which I just don't understand the WordPress thing.
Yeah, like totally ripping on WordPress here. Join Webflow. We're both not affiliated. It's but I think more importantly, that also ties into how marketing and brand work really well together, because them coming up with those tutorial videos and having McGuire, the guy who does all of them, and doing things like the no code conference, like, things that earn them money, like that is marketing to a T, where you plan something that is going to help somebody, even if it's like a new branch off of your core product, which in this case is their web design software. That all ties together. And that's how marketing and brand are coupled, right?
Yep.
Like Webflow's brand is empowering creative people to be the best that they can be. And their marketing efforts show that. Like the purpose carries all the way through, which is why I think it's a really good example.
Yeah, I mean, I always say like marketing helps you get leads / customers. Brand helps you get fans. Like whenever I ask somebody, do you have customers or do you have fans? Because it's a huge difference. If you get fans, that's usually like whenever you start getting that product market fit and things are really like taken off for your company. If you can create fans behind your brand, first of all, it makes marketing so much easier. But that's whenever you get that whole word of mouth thing going and things start costing less. You're not like, you don't have to convince people to, use your product or service. Everything just gets so much easier once you like have that pivotal moment to where you built a strong enough brand where you start having fans. And that's like, it's the simple way to think about it is whenever you can get somebody to talk about your company or brand without you convincing them to do it, like convincing them to write a testimonial versus them saying, hey, just checked out or just worked with Brando and they did a fabulous job with my campaign, without me telling them to do that, then you just earned your first fan.
Exactly. Yeah. I think a really good way of characterizing this is coming up with like an easily replaceable tool, like, and not to harp on the one that we're working with right now, but like, if I was Zoom's CEO, I would be pissing in my pants knowing that Apple is getting ready to release like their own in-house like Zoomification of FaceTime that they're looking to do. Because right now, like no one is a Zoom fan, as you said, right? Like it's the tool, it's right place, right time. Right.
It's funny you say that. I agree. I don't think there's Zoom fans, but there's definitely people that I've gotten so used to Zoom now, like especially during the pandemic, that they don't like it whenever I like give them a Google Meet link or going on Teams or whatnot. But yeah, I agree. Zoom doesn't necessarily have fans, but Apple's somebody that can disrupt that marketplace and create fans around it.
Absolutely. Or there's another tool that you and I have both talked about in the past, like Loom, not to be confused with Zoom, but like, it's an equivalent, not the same tool, but Loom has a more robust brand, and it like different offering from Zoom. It's for those who don't know, it's a screen recording software, but you can also, it accesses your camera and accesses your screen at the same time. So you're able to record videos. I use it for client feedback, like if I'm going over something and I want to show my screen and talk about it. And their whole thing was, it's like, well, look, we're digitizing the way that the world works, and we're trying to make that easy and bridge the gap that's lost over email and over Slack and over messaging platforms. Like, that's a way better mission and purpose than Zoom right now, which is like, we have this product that you need right now or that you really needed because you were all quarantined and locked up from home, and now you're hooked and used to it. But give us a reason to switch and we will.
Yeah, Loom is one of those, they could disrupt like, I don't know how to explain it, but it's kind of like communications and stuff. But they're like almost creating a new category. I'm a huge fan of Loom. I hate being disrupted all day with like Slack messages and text, like people starting to text me now too. It's like, I don't know why people in business think texting's okay now. Like keep business on Slack and email and like kind of limit those things. But yeah, I hate getting disrupted all the time with Slack messages with all these questions and stuff. And I hate typing up long emails, and I hate getting on calls. It just disrupts your flow on your day. So with Loom, it's like so much easier to just record the Loom, talk about whatever you need to talk about, whether it's, especially with design, that's probably an amazing tool for you to say, hey, looking at the website, maybe this should be changed over here. Can we tweak this and do this, and then send it off? But yeah, I love Loom. I think they're doing something special there. That, like I said, I think they could be creating a new category and kind of disrupting the whole way we communicate in business.
Yeah, they can. And the thing with is that's what really cool and innovative brands are able to do, is they create their own category, which it's like, that is helpful if you are creating a new brand. If you can be the first mover in a product category, it's going to be really hard to see you as somebody other than the first person that did it. If you ever read Rice and Trout's Positioning, they give the example of, who's the first person to fly across the Atlantic? Charles Lindbergh. Who is the second? Crickets. No one knows. But they follow that up with, well, who is the first woman to fly across the Atlantic? And I would guarantee you know the name of this person. Exactly. Amelia Earhart.
Thank God I got that right.
But I had a history lesson, faux pas right on the Zoom call. But that's exactly what she did. It's like, it's creating a new market category, and that in effect becomes part of the brand, and like that they're able to latch on to.
Yeah, I would argue that you can't you can't create a new category without a strong brand. It's just impossible.
Well,
like you can't half-ass it. You have to go full. Like if you're creating a new category, you almost like, you got to go get funding. You got to have a big team behind you, because as soon as you start gaining some traction, everybody's going to start going after you.
Yeah. And that's, I think a really good example of that is someone who you know more than I do, but Andrew Gazdecki with Bootstrappers, right? And MicroAcquire, and creating that whole ecosystem of like, that's a new category that he has created and digitized the way that you would sell a business. Like that has never been done before. And it all leads into his brand as well.
Yeah, first of all, huge shout out to Andrew. He's a really good friend of mine. And what he's doing with MicroAcquire is, I think, first of all, I was talking about this. I'm like, he always says this too, is like, whenever you're starting a new company, think about a customer you want to work with, and then kind of build your company around that. And I just can't think of a better customer to work with day in and day out. And that's founders and startup founders, especially ones that are very successful. I almost compare it to like a professional athlete, right? To get to the level some of these founders are getting to, that, you know, $1 million plus acquisitions, like those are like the best of the best in the business world, just tackling, like going after it every single day, going through all the failures and just persevering. And a lot of them are, you know, some are, you know, super smart guys, and some are just like hustlers and just getting stuff done. But I love, you know, I'm an entrepreneur at heart, but I love like working with other founders and, you know, talking with them. And what he's done with Microacquire is pretty cool. I mean, he went through that whole thing where he had to sell his company and it wasn't a fun experience. So he went out and just trying to make that experience special for anyone that is trying to get acquired.
Yeah. And it's like, that's him. It's a perfect example of imbuing your story into your brand. And I'm sure, like, because I've seen Microacquire's design stuff, it's more abstracted, and like it's like they took the concept of a micro acquisition of a company, which is useful. It's harder sometimes to like to work at that kind of level where you're thinking about things more conceptually, as opposed to like a very easy mashup of concepts. And you can also see that with Bootstrap, but I think it's more present in Bootstrappers, right? Like Bootstrappers has this illustration that comes up with every single person that they mention in their newsletters. It's more vibrant as far as color. So it's got this like middle finger-esque attitude toward it, right? Which is great because you can compare that to looking at something like TechCrunch, which is very clean, which is very professional, like should be listed on Forbes and all this other stuff. And Bootstrappers is like, just screw that, man. Like we're gonna have some fun and let it ride.
Yeah, and I'm sure you saw this, but you know, that's another thing that Andrew did very, very well, is he created that tension between a big juggernaut like TechCrunch and kind of the David and Goliath story with like all these little founders that, as a marketer, like one of the biggest things that you can end up doing is getting put into a big publication. That's usually like, you know, that's like your Hail Mary, getting put into TechCrunch or a big publication like that, and your website blows up overnight. But what was happening is Andrew saw that all these companies that were on TechCrunch were all raising capital. And he's like, all these are is just a bunch of raise announcement. This isn't news. He goes, news is like, hey, this dude freaking, he has a bunch of great stories in Bootstrappers, and I'm just going to make one up. But like, you know, this dude like had to fight through cancer and he survived, and he created this company, and now he has like his whole family working with him. I'm making this full story up, but it tells a great story about these people that are bootstrapping their companies. That's actually a way more interesting story to read, and not just some funding round that could have been a tweet or, you know, but anyways, he created that whole David and Goliath thing against TechCrunch. And he's like, you know what? I really do care about these founders, which is this customer. I want to get their story out. And if TechCrunch's not going to do it, I'm going to do it on my own.
Yeah. It's a really smart play defining the enemy. Like that is, if you've ever watched, like I've heard a lot of political strategists say this. They're like, look, before you introduce yourself, like talk about the villain that you're looking to defeat. And I'm going to hit on Star Wars again, because you can pretty much tie everything you want in the world back to Star Wars. But before you see, like Luke Skywalker doesn't show up until like 15, 20 minutes within the movie. Darth Vader shows up within 3 minutes. And in Avengers Infinity War, the first thing you hear is like the static with a black screen and then a busted ship. And then you see and hear Thanos, right? Like it's way more provocative to first define the thing in this person's life, like your user, that sucks, and then talk about how you're going to kill it.
Yeah, Andrew definitely did a great job of, you know, going after that playbook of, you know, defining the enemy and going after him. And you've probably been somewhere in your life where there was somebody that everybody's like, I've been in company environments where there was, you know, you call them a villain or somebody that everybody's kind of hating, and like people would like go to the water cooler and talk about this and like build friendships around hating something, or maybe it wasn't something that come, but it was maybe it was like you know, a competitor or whatever. But there's always like that creating that villain, and it's easy to hate that person, right? There's actually the flip side of this. Was it Jake Paul? The Paul brothers. I don't know their name. Jake and
Oh,
Logan.
Logan Paul. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What's there's a name for this in the wrestling world where what's the guy that everybody hates? I forgot. There's a name for it. I have to figure this out, but
I mean, it sounds like the 800-pound gorilla, right? Like that would be an accurate
that's like,
comparison.
yeah, so that's like the whole secret in the wrestling world is they have the guy that everybody hates and they build the story around that. But that's what like Jake and Logan Paul did, is they became the villains in the story versus the hero, and everybody hates them, but they're, I think, one of the top YouTubers, and they're both multimillionaires now.
Yeah. I would caveat this with, look, we're not encouraging everybody to hate people that you work with or like make enemies specifically out of people.
And I hate the fact that I just talked about the Paul brothers. I need to probably delete that out of this podcast.
You need a different and better example. Just stick with fictional characters, man. It works way better. No one gets mad at you for hating the guy in the black cape.
Yeah, yeah. So you know, great conversation here. The thing I want to like end this with is we talked about whenever you're starting out with your company, your brand starts at the very beginning. As soon as you start talking about it, your brand's already started. Now, the way you build that brand through time will depend if you get serious about it or not. But from my experience, it's so much easier to define that at the very beginning and have that groundwork laid out. So that way, whenever you are trying to build the company and going into doing marketing campaigns and telling people about your brand and sending the message out there, it obviously saves you a lot of time, saves you a lot of money. It unites the team, and there's an internal thing there too, you know, unites that team. But it ultimately just makes your job so much easier when you don't have to like recreate something every single time you want to like launch a marketing campaign or talk about your company.
Yeah. So pulling a question from that, it sounds like what are the things that you would start out with, like at the very beginning?
Yeah.
A base there. Okay.
I guess I didn't follow that question. I kind of just wanted to wrap it up here, but the idea here is like, why does it cost you? Why does not having a strong brand cost you when you're running marketing or when you're trying to market your company? Let me retract from all this, and I'll delete this part out. But so what I want to end this with is how can having a strong brand save you in the long run when you're trying to market your company? First want to say is from my experience, when I've worked at companies without a strong brand, that's actually usually one of the first things I would start with as like the head of marketing is I would polish up the brand first and then focus on like these high impact marketing campaigns. But from your experience, what's your thoughts on, you know, getting started with brand? And like, let's talk a little bit about when you're like, let's talk about the guys who are just starting out, the startups, like the founders. Like we talked about Apple and stuff, but what's a great way to get started and to kind of keep polishing it up and kind of going forward with that?
Well, the truth is that it doesn't take a whole lot for you to make a really big impact in this arena. I think that what most founders get, they get analysis paralysis of like I have no idea like where to start. And it starts with introspection and also observation of what's going on around you. There are 3 rules that I live like that I build my brand around and I tell other people to build the brand around. And there are 3 F words. none of which are 4 letters. The first one is be forthright, which is take stock of how things could improve and admit when things need to change. And I guess I come at that mainly from a design perspective. Like, look, admit when things don't look as good as they could. Admit when things don't feel the way that they should. Admit when your design is off base. And that's a really good place to start, of just that honesty with yourself of like, look, this isn't as good as I want it to be. How can I get it there? The second one is be focused. And this is geared primarily toward your mission and the person that you are looking to impact the most. Don't build a brand for 10 different people trying to solve 10 different problems. Pick one person, one transformation that they go through, and one core feeling that you want them to feel, and pull that thread through the entirety of everything that you do. Your product, your marketing, your messaging, all of it should be geared toward that person and the better person that they are going to become because of using your product. Third is be fearless. And you need to be fearless because you have to be different than all these other companies that are out here. And I think the best way to do that is to fearlessly include your story within your branding and your marketing. And I like to tell founders to give them some inspiration is to infuse your muse. So what a muse is, because I know that's a more esoteric word, is someone that inspires you to create or take action. Like if you're writing a song, the muse is probably like the pretty girl that you're writing the song about. Mm-hmm. And as far as branding a company, the muse are the things that make you feel the way that you want other people to feel. And they're actual things. Like I categorize them in three arenas. There's people, fictional or real. There are places, fictional or real. And then there are things, which is like a catch-all for whatever's not included in those first 2 categories. And I say fictional or real because the more archetypal that you can model, the better. Like build your brand around Superman or Oprah or Jane Austen or David Bowie. Find someone that has a very distinct character to them and see what you can pull from there, be it the things that they wear, their mannerisms, the way that they speak, the colors that they adorn, like, what is making you feel this particular way. Places, same thing. You can find a lot of good texture and color and descriptions in thinking of things like the Shire or a local bar or restaurant that you really admire, or like Arrakis if you're a Dune fan. Like there's all these really cool things that is already around you that you can pull from. And then things is a catch-all because sometimes you get grander movements that are worth investigating. Like my brand is a collision of punk music and minimalism from a design standpoint. So like my verbiage and the way that I speak and the way that I act is very punk, but it's coupled with this void of excess, right? Like I'm not going to indulge in things. Like I'm not going to try and capture 90% of the market share within the design community. And, like I offer fixed prices. I only take on 3 projects at a time. Like those values are real. And having the wherewithal to look at them and define them and articulate them is what makes your brand fearless.
Dude, I like that. First of all, great branding with calling the 3 F words. I'll never forget that.
Right.
But great insight on brand. Hopefully this helps you, think about this whenever you're going out there and trying to. I get a lot of questions on this whenever people are starting their company. From a marketing perspective, it's really important to have a strong brand. It's more than just the logo. But thanks for coming on, Zach. Before we leave here, a couple things. One, how can we find you? And how about leave us with a great book or something that they can pick up to kind of look into maybe brand or whatever?
Yeah. Okay. So you can find me. I'm not on Instagram or Facebook because I'm anti, like, you know, metaverse and all that other stuff. But you can find me on LinkedIn. It's my name, Zach, and my last name is Stevens, Stevens. My website URL it's a really hipster URL. It's zstvns.design. So think my first initial and my last name, but without any vowels, .design.
Right on.
And a good book.
Let's see if I've read it yet.
Yeah, well, you probably have, considering this is the field that you're in. I think that one of the best books on branding as well as marketing is Seth Godin's This Is Marketing.
Yep, I like that one. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, if you want to see how all of these things work together and also avoid indulging in like useless crap from a marketing perspective, that is a great book to read, because it's going to give you a no BS answer. Like, there's no silver bullet to get you to the top of page 1 on Google. What you have to do really is show up for one person consistently and genuinely.
I love that. You know, that could be a whole nother podcast. I always say the shiny object syndrome. People want to chase the quick, easy ways to do things, but typically it's the small little things that get you somewhere.
Agreed.
Right on, man. Well, thank you for jumping on today, and thanks for everyone for joining.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Kevin.
All right. Thanks, man.